I want to welcome everybody to the Daily Cheat Sheet here with the dude and Golan. Hope everybody had a great weekend. So Golan, on Saturday, North Carolina released video footage of a Ukrainian refugee being slaughtered on a train by a black criminal who has a rap sheet longer than just one long ass rap sheet. I believe he's been arrested about 14 times. He should never have been walking on the street. And this got absolutely zero media coverage until the video was actually released. And the mayor came out and said some asinine comment. And we know that if this was a white person that committed the crime, we know it would have been labeled as anti-Ukrainian sentiment. And we know that it would have been blamed on Donald Trump for something because of the Ukraine. And we know that to be 100% true. We have a crime problem in this country, which mostly consists of blacks and mostly consists of foreigners. And until we are honest about this, we're a hop, skip, and a jump, if not there yet, to being, as we always talk about, Europe.
You know, this particular story happens to be horrific. It was a woman named Iryna, a Ukrainian woman who was just stabbed. I think it was just stabbed to death out of nowhere, just unprovoked, complete, just psychotic murder.
Hunted.
Yeah, but a really senseless thing. And when you look at the video of what happened on this train, and the person who did it had previous arrests, I believe, and still walking around. And you're talking about arrests, including ones with deadly weapons in their possession. So bad enough that this occurred. Obviously, it's senseless. It's tragic. It's horrible. It's all of that is accurate. But there's two things to think about. Number one, this is yet another example, as we talked about last week, of how no cash bail and weak leadership are causing this. And it's one of the reasons why Trump is to use federal troops to take over cities that are not dealing with crime problems on their own. And so that's a big part of what's going on here. It's again just another justification for what he's trying to do, and what in some cases he's already begun doing successfully. But I want to take it one step further. The idea that the media ignored this until the video came out, the idea that the mayor waited and waited and waited, and then finally, after it came out, said, "Oh, this is sad and tragic," or whatever he said, some mealy-mouthed nothing.
No,
statement.
I'll tell you exactly what he said.
Please.
The Democratic mayor thanked publications that chose to keep the video from the public.
Wow, I didn't know that part. That's just disgusting. Oof, man. The thing that really disturbs me about that is that this is yet another example of selective outrage, of selective information. As we've talked about before, there are plenty of stories that reflect something happening in the exact same way, the exact same methodology, to a black person being perpetrated by a white perpetrator, and a white person being perpetrated by a black perpetrator. And when a white person brutalizes a black person, which is terrible, it is not only all over the news, it is something that never leaves the news for weeks at a time. It becomes something that every single Republican has to answer for, even if it has nothing to do with politics. It becomes something that leads off these moral quandaries that launch 1,000 ships. But it happens on the other side. Often it isn't reported at all. And if it is reported, it disappears incredibly quickly. And this is just yet another example of that. A black perpetrated crime against ostensibly a white woman from Ukraine. And the easiest thing to do is brush it under the rug. And apparently for the mayor to say, "Thank you for doing so. I'm going to keep the rug firmly down on the floor."
Mind you, this is another city that's run by a Democrat. It's a state that's governed by a Democrat. We had a terrible candidate there, mind you, but nonetheless, North Carolina has decided, and this is the same state with the Fine People hoax. This is an issue.
The mayor of Charlotte, North Carolina, where this attack happened, is a woke Democrat, mask-wearing lunatic. The mayor says we need more compassion for the homeless people. Meanwhile, a homeless man with 14 prior arrests stabbed a woman in the throat, killed her because repeat offenders keep getting released. If you keep repeat offenders in prison, then this would not happen. That is the bottom line. It's also worth noting that George Floyd, the guy that was on fentanyl and died of drugs and choking possibly in Minneapolis, if you go to the AP, Associated Press, there are 74,221 articles about him. If you do the same search for this girl that was just stabbed in the neck, zero, not one article. So there's a double standard. If you didn't hate the media enough, the Democrats were outraged when Daniel Penny saved a trainload of people in New York from another deranged
Well, that's a
lunatic who
great
threatened to kill
analogy.
them all. He
Yeah,
threatened to
great
kill everybody
analogy.
on the train. He said, I'm about to do it. Daniel Penny, an ex-Marine, put him in a chokehold. The guy wound up dying, and he was put on trial. They are silent. The entire Democratic establishment is silent.
Let me break in for a second, because something you just brought up is something that I constantly bring up, and I'm really glad you brought up Daniel Penny. And now there are articles, just for the record, there are articles. You could go to the New York Post or conservative sites, but something you brought up is so much happens, Mend, that it's something that we talk about, that Golan talks about, like when you bring up fake news, by the time you get to a story, they're 3 stories ahead. So we forget about people like Daniel Penny, you forget about Kyle Rittenhouse's. So I'm really happy you brought that up, and sorry to interrupt you. I just thought it was such a great point.
No, it's important. People keep on making this about race. This crazy black guy killed a white girl. And of course it is, because blacks are, I think it's 600 times more likely to kill a white person than it is a white person to kill a black person, even though black people in the country only make up 15% of the population. So they are doing an outsized share of killing in their communities, especially in their communities, but also against white people. So the biggest threat to a black child in this country, a black person in this country, is another black man. And it's also safe to say that the biggest threat to a white person in this country is a black man. So in both cases, a black man. So if you kept repeat offenders in prison, that is the solution. A certain demographic always ends up feeling like they are mass incarcerated. And if that is the case, so be it. The answer is not to take violent criminals and let them walk the street. The answer is to work with that community so that they stop producing so many violent criminals. That is the answer. So what these people are doing is they are protecting the wolves and sacrificing the sheep. And this poor girl came from Ukraine for a better life, and she was sacrificed at the altar of wokeness like a sheep. Another thing
Well
to
said.
note.
Did you see the video footage, by the way, guys?
I did. There's
So
a
do you
congressman.
no, Mend. I think it's really important to note the video footage, because not everybody sees the video footage, right? So not everybody sees him just strolling afterwards, people just ignoring somebody covered up in blood, him taking off the hoodie, no policeman on the train tracks, obviously, right? Where, we're both from New York, right? Where thank God for a long time, New York had amazing, what's the Mass Transit Authority. You had police all over the rail, something we're missing Golan in Los Angeles. So the fact that this guy was able to get off the train bloody, take the hoodie off, and get on another train is absolute insanity. And that's another question people should be asking, man. Is it safe to take a train in North Carolina or in many other cities in this country? Sorry to interrupt again.
When this came out, I was taking my kids to jiu-jitsu, and I showed them the video, not the stabbing, but up until. And I said, look at this girl. She's distracted. She's looking at her cell phone. She sits down in front of this guy. She didn't even look around. She didn't take any kind of precautions. I'm like, you can't go through life like that. And I hate saying it like this because, we live in a fairly safe area, but I don't want my kids to be that unaware of what your surroundings are. You got to be aware. So it's a horrific thing, but I also feel like it's my job to educate my kids on what the real state of the world is. The news outlets and media would have you believe that the most dangerous thing in America right now is a single white male. That's been their narrative forever. Toxic masculinity and white male, everything. Ilhan Omar keeps on talking about that. The most dangerous thing to our country. And the entire Biden administration went along with that. And they were locking up, Christian moms and white males at record numbers because they were saying that is the most dangerous thing. The biggest threat to our society is, white nationalists. Absolutely bullshit. Completely wrong. There's no data to back that up. The data does back up is that the biggest threat to a white person in America is a black male, and the biggest threat to a black male in America is another black male. So there's a problem in that community, and a lot of that has to do with, single mom homes, and these kids are just being raised on the streets and learning to just tough it out, which is no way to live. It's like a jungle mentality where for survival of the fittest.
But we're also in a No, we're also in a world, though, say the cops on the platform and all of that. Men brings up on a regular basis what happened back in December 2024, where that woman was lit on fire by an undocumented Guatemalan guy, and on the subway in New York on the F train, on Coney Island F train, and there were cops that stood by. It was in the New York Post. It was all over the place that they stood by and watched as she was engulfed in flames. She was not dead. She was engulfed in flames, and these officers stood by and didn't know what to do. And finally, it took an MTA employee to grab a fire extinguisher and put out the fire. And 9 days later, she died of her wounds. But imagine what had happened if they hadn't been so apathetic on the platform. I think we're in a place now where it's not just a matter of who's there and who's not there. I think it's a matter of everybody wants to keep their head down. Nobody wants to get involved. Nobody, as I told the story about when I used to live in Brooklyn, and that one cop stood next to me watching someone steal a car and told me, I don't want to get involved. What if they're videotaping me? This is the world we live in now.
I was watching a video about that on Instagram with I don't know, you never know if the videos are true or not, but it was a black guy that had said he just got assaulted and he walked up to two female police officers, and the title of the video was like DEI in action.
I saw that. I saw that video.
Yeah,
they said it's not our area.
Yeah,
Go call 911.
They said it's not our area, call 911. And the black guy said, you are 911. And he kept on using the N-word. And he's like, you are 911. And I thought that was it was like, holy crap, Golan. But again, I want to get back to this. If we're not honest about men was talking about and what I brought up in the first place, we are deceiving ourselves. And what was that line you used about the sheep mend?
If you protect the wolves, you sacrifice the sheep. And that's what they're doing.
And go on when it comes to immigration, when it comes to crime in the black community. I think 6 or 8 more people were murdered this weekend in Chicago. We're not being honest. And nobody wants to be honest because they're scared to death to be shut down, to be canceled, to be called a racist.
That's exactly right. But look, I'm going to come back. I don't want to feel like I'm being, hair on fire here, but I also think that we are in a problematic space right now. The idea that people are celebrating murderers. We're in a society where we used to condemn them, and now we're celebrating them. We watch someone kill a healthcare CEO, and that fat cat had it coming. We watch someone take a massive machine gun, walk into an NFL facility, and they were like, it's poetic justice because he had a brain injury, or that was the story they tried to sell us anyway. The 2 Israeli diplomats were killed, and the guy who literally, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders and Zoran Mamdani, this group they belong to, were like, that's great, good job. And it's just over and over. And now this guy, as I'm sure we're going to talk about, this guy's had GoFundMe campaigns.
Right. I wanted to bring that up. So he obviously deranged people, no different than the women that fall in love with men on death row, or the people that have fallen in love with Hamas, started a GoFundMe for this guy. Now, GoFundMe had this up, and GoFundMe has in its policy that they don't allow violence. That's one of the things they don't allow, which is all BS. We know that. The censors would have caught this immediately if this was reversed, and we know this to be the case, because in the summer of 2020, they set up, they were, and this is something for Pam Bondi that she really needs to investigate. 2020, they had tons of bail funds set up for looters and rioters, tons of them. You're talking about a lot of money. I don't want to give the exact amount because it's in the many, many, many millions, right, where it was set up. But anybody for J6, they banned. And this is we brought up about the baker in the past, right, where that baker wasn't allowed to, got in trouble for not baking a cake for a gay couple, which I disagree with. I don't think her bakery should be shut down. But go on. This is GoFundMe, which is allowing that. And their censors should have picked this up immediately. And going back to 2020, when they allowed people to walk on the street after looting police stations and doing all this and banning all conservatives, GoFundMe needs to be looked into and shut down.
I don't disagree. And, you can look back at, you were mentioning the J6 stuff. The one I like to look at is Kyle Rittenhouse. Whether you liked or didn't like Kyle Rittenhouse, everything that went up on his behalf was immediately taken down. They were pulled down fast because they have that policy on, I'm going to put policy in heavy quotes, policy on violent crime cases, right? So, but within hours, these things were taken down. Here, they stayed up for much longer. And I get that, okay, maybe the algorithm missed that and the other thing. This was something that specifically had the guy's name. His name was already out because of the video. This is something that should have been caught immediately. And that discrepancy matters because that discrepancy means that they allowed it to stay up longer than they could have. That alone means someone should look into what's going on.
Kyle Rittenhouse, you say whether you like him or not. What's not to like him? The guy went to a protest.
I love him. I know.
No,
I'm like, what are you talking about?
I know. But I'm pointing it out for the audience. I'm pointing it out for the audience.
But the audience has to understand why I'm saying that. The audience has to understand that I'm saying that whether you are on this side or whether you're on this side,
you're raising a great point.
There's a discrepancy between how long these things stay up matters, regardless of what side.
No, you're right.
That's why you investigate.
You're right. And they did take this thing down. I posted about it. I couldn't believe that GoFundMe had that up. Talking about crime numbers, and you were talking about Chicago a minute ago, the Democrats claim to care about black people, yet 7,000 people in Chicago have been shot and killed since 2020. I believe it was since 2020. 80% of them are black. So if you really cared about black people, you would be begging, as the Democrats do, or, the people, you would be begging the Trump administration to send in the National Guard, but they're not. They're fighting it as if this is an attack on our democracy. In 2020 alone, 179 people were killed in Chicago. That was 2020. 2021, it was 805. So this is just ongoing. It's a hellhole. It's a revolving door of just letting people out, and then they commit more crimes. Interestingly, there's a guy named Randy Fine out of Florida who is trying to get legislation passed to hold judges and DAs accountable if they let someone off the hook and they go out and commit murder or crime, whatever, mostly murder. And I don't think it's going to be able to be passed because there's
no way.
They have judicial immunity. There's judicial immunity that these guys have. So they need to, we talked about this the other day. They need to start impeaching judges. They need to start having tribunals or whatever about these judges that are just flouting the law. When you let someone go, said it before, you let the criminal go, you are sacrificing a sheep. And by a sheep, I'm talking about someone's child. It's always someone's child that gets killed because these violent offenders are out there just wreaking havoc. And you can't have a society. You can't have a society without law and order. And I don't know what the end goal is for these people. I get it. They're trying to say that there's too many black people incarcerated. Therefore, let's just stop incarcerating. And what we're seeing is the results of that. Since 2020, the woke agenda has been out there, and the Soros-backed DAs have been letting violent criminals free, and we're just seeing crime just go rampant. And you're seeing innocent victims like this Ukrainian girl who came over to escape death, to escape the Russian war, and she winds up getting killed by a deranged black guy on a streetcar.
You well said. And what we're also seeing, I'm not going to, last week when Bobby Kennedy was asked about, how many people were murdered, how many people died during COVID, and his answer was, we don't really know, right? The statistics were all manipulated. Going to this crime stuff, we know that the FBI manipulated statistics. We know they did this before the election. This isn't speculation, Golan. This is just fact. And this is, again, why some people got upset at me for my post about Pam Bondi, that she really needs to start investigating and not announcing and indicting. This doesn't take a rocket scientist to indict. You could get most people indicted, Golan.
I want people to understand this, by the way. I want people to understand when you say that the crime stats are cooked, right, and they're massaged, they're manipulated, what does it mean? Because they can't just say, well, that crime didn't happen, right? So how do they do it? It's actually way more insidious than that. They don't want to have certain crimes that are classified in a certain way because too many of those, you look bad. Too many of those, the crime statistics show that you're underwater. So they reclassify. It's actually this really clever, evil way of doing something. So what that means is if someone goes and tries to rob you and they have a gun, that's called armed robbery. But if it's reclassified as theft, then it's a totally different classification. It goes from this down to here. Not as big a deal anymore. If someone comes at you and it's aggravated assault, that regularly gets refiled as disturbance, a knife attack, gets reclassified as simple assault, as if there was no weapon, because it's not a gun and it becomes harder to prove. And they do this over and over and over again. Poof! With that, the crime rate goes down and the streets aren't any safer, but the spreadsheets show that it is. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about reclassification.
Listen,
There's another
sorry, go
part
ahead.
to that too. I have it, and people online have been doing it, and I'll post it in our Substack. When they make arrests for crime, you see the mugshot, you see the perpetrator, and let's say it's a black male, 50 years old, but below his name and his mugshot, it says white male. So they are deliberately skewing with the numbers where you can't even look at the data and pull out real actionable info, because they've been messing with it, especially under the Biden administration.
You know what it's like when they do this, when they say Republican Randy Fine from Florida, and then if it's not, they'll just, if it's not a Republican and it's a Democrat, they choose to leave the D off. So then you even have to do a deeper dive to see what party this person's from, just so you could be factually correct about this. And listen, here's the reality: we have a crime problem. We have a massive crime problem in our country. President Trump brought it up today about what illegal immigration does. This is something that cannot be ignored, and it's for the safety of our country. France is about to fall. They had another prime minister today that got that had to resign. Right.
One of my favorite stories of the day.
It's their fourth prime minister, and right, if I'm not mistaken, in the past 12 months, a country that has thoroughly been invaded. But I want to get to this because it's extremely important what men and both of you just brought up about how crime statistics could be extremely misleading, right? So,
By the way, sorry, I'm going to interrupt you for just 1 second. By the way, we didn't even get into half of the ways that they manipulate these numbers. We didn't get into the fact that cops are discouraged from even taking reports. We didn't get into the fact that half the crimes that are being called in at 911 are being closed and called unfounded, as if the cops don't believe something happened. We didn't even get into the fact that victims are so disillusioned that they stop calling the cops. So crimes happen and they're not even reported. There's 1,000 ways they do this. We were only touching on some of them. Sorry, Judah, go ahead.
I want to get into this. So Trump posted today, 1 in 4 Swedish women will be raped and sexually assaulted, an increase of 500%. That's just in Sweden. But I want to get to France quickly, where it's, I wanted to bring this up last week, where Trump got into office, and I think I might have posted about this, but Trump got into office. I don't think he realized how left the world went in a 4-year period. I don't think he came in there and said, or we might have discussed this last week. I think he came in there and he was like, oh yeah, we could get back to business, not realizing that these countries have gone totally bat crazy psychotic, Golan. And you have France, where Macron is just a tool. And 70% of the country is far left. What I wanted to bring up, though, sorry to interrupt both of you, quickly about how they lie about statistics.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at, and this is what Katie Hopkins' point was, yes, the number might be 7% Muslim in France, or 10% Muslim, or 7%, but if that 10% is in the major cities, that's a massive problem. That's a distortion of statistics. They're not living in Schenectady, New York. You know what I mean? They're living in men appreciates that. It's like when somebody one time said that, they said, yeah, I'm a New Yorker. I said, where are you from? They said Schenectady. I'm like, it's not New York, my friend. But go on. Sorry to interrupt.
No, I think this is something that people are simply not aware of, that they look at crime statistics and they think it means something. They feel warm and fuzzy inside because the numbers have gone down, or they feel like these policies are starting to work. And, the things you're told on the news, when the mayor or the police chief comes out and goes, crime is down, and they point to all this stuff that's been reclassified or underreported. And by the way, this information has come out through whistleblower cops. This is not just something we're making up in our heads. They've admitted openly that the departments are gaming the stats to please City Hall. So people who aren't aware of it don't recognize that this has very little to do with every officer being corrupt, and it has more to do with the system being corrupt, the system incentivizing this sort of thing. It's one of the dirtiest open secrets in urban America. So to get back to France, this is a place where crime runs rampant, where, as Judah just pointed out, over and over and over again, they're having to kick out the people that are running things. France just turned through, I think it's his fourth prime minister in under a year, another no confidence vote. This is his austerity budget. He was scrapping public holidays. He was freezing spending, all the stuff. And the one thing they weren't doing is going over here and going, look at all the crime being perpetrated by all these people who are not going to assimilate into our society. In fact, Macron himself, in free fall politically, was about to recognize, I think he may still be set to recognize Palestine at the UN, quote unquote, the fantasy land Narnia, Palestine, at the UN General Assembly in September. And so this is what he prioritizes. This is the thing that he's saying, this is the thing I want to focus on. I don't want to focus on my own citizens that are collateral damage in my desire to virtue signal to all the Qatari money that I'm getting. It's disgusting.
You know, when you import people who believe that if a woman wears anything but a burqa, she's inviting rape. When you import people who absolutely are antithetical to your moral values, and they do not share any of that with you, and you do not have a program to make them assimilate, you just integrate. So you're just plopping them out in cities, and you're telling the cities, hey, accommodate these new people. You want to do a call to prayer 17 times a day? You got to shut up and listen to it. Your daughter got raped by one of these guys? You're an Islamofascist, and you should not be espousing your crazy anti-Islam beliefs here. This is not for you. It's worth noting when you talk about stats, in England and Wales, in 2020, there were 8,593 rapes. It's a lot, 2020.
That's insane. That's an insane number per capita.
Yeah, that's great. In 2023, it went from 8,000 to 68,109. It went
No.
up.
I'm sorry. I think you're mistaken with the years. It was from 2000 to 2023.
Sorry, from 2000, there was 8,000. And in 2023, maybe it is that time frame, it went up to 68,000.
Yeah, we brought that up the multiples. Yeah, no, 100%. But it's just important to say
Germany was 8,000. Now it's 39,000. 2020, 2023. France went from 7,000 to 42,000. Poland went from 2,000 down to 1,000 because Poland doesn't allow any of those immigrants to come into their country. So if you want to see the clear, that's the control. The control is the country. What would it look like for a European country that did not allow immigrants to come in? That's Poland. They're the controls thing. And theirs, rapes went down because they're
and you could look at China. I mean, you could look at many other places that have the same thing, that refuse to let Islam invade their countries. I mean, anywhere where Islam is not allowed to invade will have a lower crime rate. That's just a fact.
It's just a fact.
Yeah.
Absolutely. This is something where I'm going to use men's word again. The values that they espouse are antithetical to a Western civilization. They don't see people who are not part of their cult as people that are worthy of human recognition. Certainly women, certainly gays, certainly blacks. But besides that, I mean, remembering that this is one of the groups that still to this day practices slavery. So I'm not just whistling Dixie here. And so these are people who literally look at you if you don't believe what they believe and bow down to who they bow down to. They know that you are worthy of subjugation, you are worthy of rape, and ultimately you are worthy of murder.
Before we move on and before Mend has a heart out, I want to, because there's a subject I actually want to get his opinion on. Not that I don't want to get his opinion on other things, but this one specifically. But Golan, you've heard me for years saying the only thing propping up, of course, on the world according to Ben Stein, the only thing propping up the EU has been the Middle East. That is their sole thing right now that props them up. So they need the Middle East to be in chaos in order for them to survive. Otherwise, they have literally zero utility left in the world. And I stand by that 100%. But is it okay to move on, or am I wrong on that?
Look, I think it's a valid statement that is a bit overblown. I think obviously Europe's growth is fragile. I think they do not understand how to stand morally by anything. I think there is so much corruption that it is shocking. I think that there's energy panic left and right. I think Europe stays quiet while people are raped and murdered, and then they side with the rapist and the murderers. There's plenty of reasons to think Europe is useless. There are things still coming out of Europe that I happen to like. I happen to live in Europe, but every day
You live in a place where they are now persona non grata, right?
I was about to say this but every single day, my wife and I have that look at each other like, how much longer are we going to stay here? The more they become anti-Semitic, more they're literally today, Spain pulled their ambassador from Israel, not because Israel had done something wrong, but because Israel pointed out that they were anti-Semitic. Spain, your history, I don't think you should be as shocked as you think you
any
are.
of them.
But, there's a common thread. The common thread is that it's all of these Democrat socialists. It's always the super left that have become the new fascists in the world. So you take countries like Poland, where they're not super left, they still seem like they have their heads on straight. You look at Europe, where they're taking in both Muslims and, violent criminals from Africa, North Africans. And that's why you're having the rape problems and all the other problems they got there. And here in America, we have the same violent criminals that we're letting in from South America. And they're not Islamic lunatics. They're just gangbangers that have no value on life. And they're doing the same thing. And thank God Trump's rounding them up. But we weren't invaded the same way with the radical Islamists like Europe was. And Europe is going to have a reckoning. I mean, I think you're going to see some sort of civil uprising where the masses are just going to have enough. They're going to be
already
sick
started,
of their,
by the way.
You're
It's
seeing
already
some
started.
of
There
it.
are certain places. No, but this is why I say started. There are certain places where, for instance, in Ireland, a place that, clearly not pro-Jewish, but they're also not pro being taken over by the Muslim horde. And you watch the IRA, and I don't remember the name of the other group, but it's a group that they have long been a rival of.
Sinn Féin?
That's part
IRA
of IRA.
was Sinn Féin. Yeah.
Yeah, IRA, exactly. No, another group that had been
I know
the
what you're
rival of
talking.
the
I know
IRA.
exactly, because I
and
know
they
this from the Jack
partnered
Ryan
together.
movie.
Yeah, they
Wow.
partnered together for the first time in history to fight who? The Muslim refugees. So I think it's like a little microcosm of what the Crusades might be as we go into what you're talking about.
Colin-
we do see eventually that civil unrest turn into something more.
Colin McGregor, the UFC
Conor.
Conor McGregor, the UFC MMA fighter, he is trying to run as Prime Minister of Ireland. I think he's first going to try to get some sort of cabinet position, whatever they have out there. But he's trying to save the country. He's against all of that nonsense, all of the woke Palestinian insane invasion. Let foreigners invade your country and take over. How does that make any sense? First of all, it doesn't make any sense for your population because they just become the sheep that get slaughtered. But how does it make sense for your country? Forget about your population. Like your country, your identity is just being erased. For what?
Man, I want to get to you though before you get to our famous Tucker had an interview with a guy that got fired last month from the State Department. His name is Shahid Ghorishi. I'm probably as Tom Brady. I couldn't believe Tom Brady said this last night during an NFL game. Like he had such a hard time pronouncing some people's names. He would call them Bud. He would come up with nicknames because I was like, oh my God. But so Shahid Bud. He told Tucker Carlson that one of the reasons that he was upset with his superiors by offering condolences to the families of the supposed journalists killed in August. So Tucker then responded, and I'm not kidding when I say this. He said, let me just say, I would be totally comfortable sharing condolences with Osama bin Laden's family. I hate Osama bin Laden. On the other hand, if somebody dies, it's okay to say, I'm sorry to his family. His son nor any family member have any direct. Oh, yeah. So that was okay. But that was exactly what.
He also had on Stephanopoulos' sister with her mustache.
I know, but I wanted to take it away from Israel for a second and bring it to simply his hatred now towards America.
America, of course. He's not America first. He's become a terror sympathizer to the point that he's willing to send condolences to Osama bin Laden, to the point that he's willing to interview this hairy nun with a mustache who claims that Hamas is just a political organization. And I saw a great supercut where they had him, Tucker, talking to the troll nun who looks like, something that lives under a bridge. And then they cut to Hamas talking about how they want to kill every single American wherever they are, wherever they stand. This is the Hamas cleric on the pulpit,
and this is
preaching this.
This
stuff.
is also with Tucker saying that Hamas is not a terrorist organization.
Yeah.
Right.
So
they're a
by the way,
group.
do you understand why he said the thing about Osama bin Laden? Because it gets more disgusting. He didn't just say, I would extend sympathies to Osama bin Laden's family. He said specifically he would extend sympathies to them about Osama bin Laden's death. So how sad it is that Osama bin Laden died. And he was comparing all the Islamic terrorists that had been killed over the course of the war. He was saying, I want to go to their families and say, I'm sorry your terrorist family member was murdered. He was saying, I offer condolences to the families of those terrorists. And he would do that with Osama bin Laden as well. So it just keeps getting worse, and he keeps digging himself deeper. There was a great, I don't say these words very often, so whoa, buckle up. But there was a great article on the Daily Beast recently that basically said, and I think the headline was literally MAGA brands Tucker Carlson a terrorist sympathizer. And there's video after video after video now coming out where they're clipping together stuff that he said before to stuff that he said now, but also just a list of things he's saying now. And the number of times, like as men pointed out, the number of times he said Israel, the number of, like, just the obsession that he's got.
That's why I wanted to leave it. That's why I wanted
for him just have fun with it.
That's why I wanted to leave it out. But before Mend has to go, I just want to ask you, because we have this rule, right? You have the rule where you don't want any foreigners pretty much being in the Congress, right?
Any elected office. None.
Any elected office. And we've all agreed that Tlaib, Omar, pretty much at least 100 Democrats or leftists should not be allowed to have any classified information. 100%. Are we all in agreement on that?
Absolutely. They should be deported. They should be kicked out of the country.
So, Mend, I ask you this question, and this is something I have no problem
Do I get to
saying.
say my opinion on this, or should I wait till you ask him the
but
question?
Mend will be gone by the time you do,
Okay,
because I really want his honest opinion on this. So, JD Vance employs Tucker Carlson's son. That means by proxy, Tucker Carlson's son is privy to a lot of information that is classified. At this point, I believe it is a national security risk that Tucker Carlson's son is working for JD Vance in a very high position in his, I believe it's deputy press secretary or deputy something with public relations. Mend, that's just the question I want to ask you before you leave, and your thoughts on that.
I'm not totally comfortable with convicting the son for the dad's crimes. We don't know this kid, and we don't know the motivation behind JD hiring him. I get it. None of it looks good. None of it feels good, but it's also a slippery slope when we start making blacklists of people who are associated or related to other people that we don't like. That's my simple take on it.
No, I understand your simple take on it, but you get where I'm going, that it does pose, if we knew that there was a sympathizer, if I'm not comparing, obviously, I'm trying to use a better example of, okay, so let's say Goebbels' son was applying for a job because
I think
Goebbels,
that's actually a perfect parallel. Continue.
And for people that are not familiar with Goebbels, he was the media arm of the Nazis and absolutely brilliant at what he did. He was brilliant at what he did. So, man, I think it's a little dangerous to allow people. I get it. You don't want to.
I'm agreeing with you that it's dangerous, and I'm agreeing with you that it's not a good look, and I'm agreeing with you that it would probably make sense for JD not to have hired this guy. But to convict him of the crimes of his father, again, it's a slippery slope. Where does it end? And I don't think as a country we want to go down that road. I'm very much in favor of merit-based hiring. And if this guy's great at his job and he's been vetted and it's, he doesn't have access to top secret info or whatever, which he doesn't, as a media guy, he doesn't. It doesn't feel good, but at the same time, there's not much that can be done about it or should be done about it.
There's a reason I wanted to ask you that question. I wanted to know where my thinking, and sometimes I do think you're more of a voice of reason than I can be. Not many times, but
I know, I'm an extremist.
I just wanted to get you, and we will see you tomorrow. Have a great rest of your day. We know it has something to do with the gym. Enjoy your bad self, and we will talk to you tomorrow.
Thank you.
See you, man.
All right.
So, Golan, you get where I'm going with this.
Well, not
And
only do I get where you're going, here's the big problem is that if you are, in fact, the deputy press secretary to the vice president of the United States, not only do you occasionally get access to classified material on a need to know basis, you also get quite a lot of access to sensitive but unclassified. That's SBU material. These are things that I wouldn't want Goebbels' son to be hanging out taking a look at. And I get that he had to go through security clearance. He had to be looked at by the FBI and do a background check and a clearance process and all of that. And I get that Tucker, as far as I know, maybe not today, but certainly was buddies with JD. And one of the reasons why JD Vance is probably my least favorite person in the White House right now is partially because of, if you want to know who someone is, know who their friends are. And it does make me absolutely nervous that, what's his name? Buckley Carlson. I don't want violence against anybody, but that's just a punchable face name right there. And Buckley probably doesn't belong in the White House. If his father is, by all accounts, being, by the way, when I say Tucker Carlson is being paid off by Qatar, I don't mean that as a hyperbolic thing. I don't mean that like I'm making up names, I'm making up numbers. We know for certain, and the receipts are in place, that Qatar paid $880,000 a month for services, setting up interviews between Qatar and the Qatari, between Carlson rather, and the Qatari prime minister, and for the Iranian prime minister, and all the rest. This is not something that I'm making up. We know for certain that he's paid by the Qataris. I've only added the word off, paid off by the Qataris, in the same way that he was paid off by the Russians, in the same way that he's likely paid off by the Iranians. A very rich dude, but apparently he needed more. And based on everything that he used to say versus what he says now, based on everything that he knows is false, based on his own history and his own education that he's shown us, he's been on TV for a very long time. So we know what he actually knows. I don't mean what he thinks, because you could change your mind about what you think. We know what he knows and what he's lying about right now. So do I want that guy who is really corrupt and working with enemies of the United States to have his son in the White House? Not for me. No.
listen, I'm glad. Listen, I was just something I was thinking about. It's something that I do have. Remember before the elections, and they were doing a tour, and JD Vance's, and Tucker started with this stuff, especially with his interview with Putin and a bunch of other things, that he continued going on tour with JD, and that was a bit of a knock. And it does worry me, these little connections that are going on in Washington.
100%.
It connects me that Don Jr. set up that social club with the same owner, I believe, that is funding Tucker Carlson's enterprise. You could look up his name, and I'm blanking on his name. It's that social club. It's the same person. Rebecca Mercer has donated. It's the not the same. Rebecca Mercer is one of the biggest conservative donors, but has gone on that, off that rail, and they started, what is it, 1889 Capital, I believe that's what it's called.
Yeah, and we know where the money's coming from. And you're talking about what's that? Omid Malik, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
And they have a social club that they set up.
1789 Capital. 1789 Capital, and we know that what they're involved.
I was only off
in,
by 100 years. Come on.
No, but you know what? You had some of the numbers right. But the other thing is, if you look at who else is involved with that, it gets even shadier and slimier. You're talking about the people from the Witkoff family. This is literally the two sons of Steve Witkoff are part of this thing. You're talking about the crypto czar, David Sachs is in it. The guys, the Winklevoss twins, if you remember them from the movie The Social Network. Like, it gets weird.
Well, and they're Gemini. Yeah, no, I'm saying that it's not like they went anywhere. They've become quite the entrepreneurs in Bitcoin. But listen,
absolutely,
this is extremely. It's one of those things I don't think Trump has much knowledge of. I don't. I do, because I do trust his judgment in many ways. I mean that from the bottom of my heart. So I'm not taking Trump out of the equation. You can't always help. But this goes again to what we brought up. It's so ancestral. And people really need to look at this. Anything we've said today so far, I beg of people to Google this and to look it up, as hard as it might be to hear sometimes, go on, because sometimes people don't often want to hear this. But I want to move on a little bit to two more subjects. So you have the podcast bros, right? So you have Theo Von, who apparently became the podcaster extraordinaire interviewer, who might be one of the dumbest SOBs that has ever lived on the planet Earth, who makes Dave Smith look like a Mensa member, having on his show Candace Owens spewing flat out blood libel. And then you have people like Tim, what's the gay podcast? Is it Tim Dillon? I always
Tim
get
Dillon,
confused. Yeah, Tim Dillon, who, is accusing Israel of ethnic cleansing on Joe Rogan. And there's something extremely vicious and horrific coming from those circles. And I didn't realize, we've been saying how bad it was since the election, but it's gone to a totally new, and here's the thing I want people to understand. When Golan talks about Qatari money, there's only so much money, and I know this from working and writing in conservative circles for many years. So people understand this just for perspective. There were a lot of online sites in the early 2000s, but they also had papers, and they had a lot of contributions. Those contributions, private and ad space. There is very limited ad space for conservatism. There's very little ad revenue, almost none. Fox probably eats it all because most companies are scared to death to do business even with a site like Breitbart, right? So if Breitbart is not getting advertising dollars as much as they should, go on for being one of the biggest news aggregates in America, if not the world, how much could these podcasters be raising off of? How much money could there be for them to be getting an ad space? Where is the money coming from?
Well, I
I
think
just
we
wanted to
know.
lay it out like that so
Look,
people
I
understand.
appreciate you laying it out like that, because the question alone, it's like G.I. Joe, right? Knowing is half the battle. So the question's already doing a lot of the heavy lifting here. Now, when you look at someone like Theo Von, look, I will be honest with you, I don't get it. I remember many years ago, I used to work at a company, a representation agency, where part of my job was to go on a regular basis to see all the stand-up comedians. I knew everybody in that world. I helped sign half of them. Many of them have gone on to multi-zillion dollar careers. Theo Von was one of those guys that was there, and I dismissed. I was like, this guy is not funny. And then his first stand-up act came out, and I was like, not funny. And I still don't get it. I understand he's very popular, so obviously I've missed something, but I just don't understand the entire appeal. But clearly, regardless of whether you think he's funny or not, he's not a policy heavyweight. He doesn't know what he's talking about. I'm not saying everyone with an accent like that is a dumbass, but he certainly is exactly the Green Acres, but not quite as smart as the pig kind of version of it. And there he is sitting across. You mentioned Candace Owens. She's at least another podcaster. How about Marjorie Taylor Greene? How about people in the government that sit across from him and have these very deep conversations, no matter what they say, no matter what blood libel they spout, no matter what centuries old nonsense that's just justifying the murder of Jews they want to say? He doesn't push back on any of it. He laughs, he riffs, he lets it slide. Sometimes he does his serious face and nods, So why did that happen? Well, when did it start? That's the other thing you want to start marking. Similar with Tucker. When did it start? Well, I've been listening to people talk about Theo Von for quite a long time. He rose to be one of the most popular podcasters in the game. And he was never talking about this stuff. In fact, he never really talked about anything serious at all until he went on a little trip to the Middle East. And once he visited Qatar, especially, and amongst others, suddenly he returned and everything had changed. I'm going to have a serious moment with you in which I don't know what I'm talking about, but it feels like a genocide was his first one. And then after that, just nodding along with all the blood libels that came down the pike. None of that existed prior to his trip to Qatar. None of Tucker's stuff really existed before his trip to Russia, before his trip to Qatar. And all of them are just lying. They're lying and saying everything that needs to be said in order to follow what is obviously a doctrine that they are being asked to repeat. And it's clear as day. And if you don't really see it, just go online. YouTube has plenty of compilations that show you exactly what I'm talking about. You're muted.
I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding when I say this. We have a guest, a great guest coming up on the 10th, comedian Mark Schiff, and brilliant, been on Tonight Show. God knows how many. Just a legendary comedian, King's comedian, and he just texted me while we were doing the show that the comedians are now blaming, uh, political commentators for being paid off by the Israelis, and at the same time, well, they're being paid off by the Saudis and the Qataris. And I just thought that was really interesting that he literally just sent me that clip as we're doing the show. And this is like really like back crazy land. And there's absolutely no, Ben Shapiro is not being paid by the Israeli government. Ben Shapiro's company has a lot of issues right now. And that's just a fact. They have a lot of issues. I'm not going to get into what issues the company has. But you're talking about Andrew Schultz, you're talking about Tim Dillon, you're talking about Theo Von, you're talking about Joe Rogan. Rogan, I'm not sure who he's obviously generates tons of money from Spotify. He doesn't need to take money from Qatar. He's the useful idiot.
Precisely correct.
That is like he's the, what do they call his comedy joint? The place in Austin. It has a name for it.
I don't remember the funny.
And I'm
bone,
totally the mothership. He's the mother.
Right.
He's the mothership for these useful idiots that are getting paid by all these countries. I just found it to be incredibly and sickly.
Well, he props them up. So he props up these guys that he likes that are stand-up comedians. And by the way, you don't have to pay off Joe Rogan. If you can pay off Dave Smith, who goes on Joe Rogan's show, and then Joe Rogan does what Joe Rogan does, which God bless him, he listens, he nods, and when you're convincing, he nods and says, oh, that's very interesting, just like he does when you present one side of the equation, and then a week later, someone will present the other side of the equation, and he'll nod and nod and nod. So it's the same thing. So all you need to do is pay off all the guys that go on his show, because you need them to say it and him to nod. He is the useful idiot because he's the one platforming them, and he's the one nodding along with them, and he's the one getting them 10 million people in an audience. They're the ones who are being paid off to say it, because without Rogan, they are nothing.
Well said. And you want to know how you can know this to be 100% the truth. And here's the thing that I enjoy about doing this, and especially when we post on True Social, is like people thank us for this info, right? Because we're trying to connect the dots, and not everybody does this or looks at it. So I'm blessed that we get to do this. So without being paid by any government, I promise you. And when you look at Tim Dillon isn't selling out crowds. He's not, he's a comedian. He's a local comedian who's got a fairly successful podcast. How much money? But you've noticed Tom Segura has not been on Rogan a lot lately. Bert Kreischer, how do you pronounce his name?
Kreischer.
Bert Kreischer, I don't believe, has been on Rogan a lot lately. Why? Because these guys sell out arenas. These guys have Netflix specials. They don't need to get involved in this.
Yeah, they show up every once in a while, and they occasionally have beef, but they're busy actually working.
They're actually working. They're not being propped up by a foreign government. And I just want to move on to one last thing. Obviously, there's nobody that wants peace in Israel and Gaza, and obviously more than the Israelis. There were a horrific terrorist attack this morning in a very religious neighborhood, and I love that this new religious unit that's been set up with the ultra-Orthodox, that the commander of the unit's the one that killed the terrorists, that killed
there are two guys. There's a guy who so one of them is an ultra-Orthodox Haredi guy who's in the unit, and the other person who was involved with this was another Haredi guy not in the unit.
Explain what that means, by the way.
Haredi is ultra-religious, ultra-Orthodox Jews, okay? And these guys who have been for many, many years not part of the military compound. They've been exempt. And little by little, there's been a push, some of it from one side saying it's not fair that you guys don't have to be in it, and some from the other side saying let's defend our homeland. Little by little, there's a voluntary system now where they are coming into the military. And some of these units are all just ultra-religious guys. So one of the people who stopped the terrorists today, and we'll talk a little moment more about what happened today in Jerusalem, but one of the guys was a Haredi guy with a gun, and the other one was not in the unit, another Haredi guy with a gun who had just received his permit 12 months earlier, post-October 7th, when they loosened gun laws in Israel. And so if you, even there was a post recently, I'll have to look at who put it up, but it was someone who is not a right-winger at all. And he said, today we have to look at the facts. Today, 2 ultra-right-wingers with guns stopped a massacre. And so no matter what way we look at it, this is not black and white. This is not simple. This is a very complex issue. And the only thing we know for sure is that these Islamists don't belong in mixed company, don't belong in polite society, and shouldn't be allowed anywhere near other human beings.
And they came from supposedly the peaceful Palestinian part and
Sure.
of Judea and Samaria, and in Israel, that's how they were. That's how they refer to it, as opposed to the West Bank. That's where they came from. And listen, I think these guys are obviously heroic, but I would also show their pictures in the Haredi, in the ultra-Orthodox communities, as a form of recruitment. And because
100%. This is
I
where
think what
that narrative starts to shift.
what I think what they did today, and this is why is proof you can never force things. It's very dangerous in society to force things in any forms of society. Things naturally progress. We've naturally progressed into many things, and God willing, this will. But to the bigger point, so Trump obviously wants this peace deal, and he said to Hamas, this is it. You let the 48 go. And immediately Hamas comes out and says, well, we'll come back to the negotiating table. So I don't know if you saw this release before. So
I'm sorry. Can we pause for a moment? Because I know we're moving on, but I just want to say something about what happened today in
yeah,
Jerusalem. Okay.
yeah, of course.
So these guys came in by car. They got onto a crowded bus in the middle of Jerusalem at this busy intersection. It's called Remote Junction. They got on the bus and they started just firing indiscriminately into the crowd. And right now, I believe it's 6 people have died. There will
At
probably
least.
be more. Yeah, there will probably be more because some of them were in very bad condition. And as we said, the 2 people that stopped them was a civilian and an off-duty soldier, both religious Jews. The reason I want to mention this is, first of all, I want to say, may their memories be a blessing. This is a nightmare of an attack and just so infuriating that this could happen. But I also want to point out, as we point out on a regular basis, media mischaracterizations. And immediately after this disgusting attack, let's set aside that Keir Starmer moments later was shaking hands with Abbas, the guy who is going to make sure that these 2 terrorist families get money because
A lot of money, because let's explain how it works. Payment plans when you kill Jews, right? And you're a martyr, a Sadiq, right? How do you pronounce that word?
A shahid.
A shahid, a shahid, and you're considered a martyr. You get paid the more Jews you kill.
Yeah, and
so
if you die in the course of committing a terrorist act, by the way, this is not Gaza. This is not Hamas. So I know we're supposed to say only Hamas are the bad guys, and thank God the Palestinian Authority is here for us to have a peace partner. We're specifically talking about the Palestinian Authority's policy. This is called pay for slay. Hey, I mean, wow, as if that wasn't bad enough to just call it pay for slay. This is a long-standing practice of providing financial stipends to, if a Palestinian is arrested in the course of it, they get money, and the money continues to increase depending on how long you're in prison. And if you are killed or wounded while you're trying to murder Jews, then your family gets paid. And that can be, by the way, $3,000 a month, which is more than the government officials in quote unquote Palestine get. And if you're in prison for 20 years, they'll get $3,000 a month for the entire time that you are in prison. And if you die, they also get a monthly stipend. And that monthly stipend goes on until they either remarry, which is very rare in that society, or until they die. And if there's a number of children, the number goes up more and more and more. And that comes out of the money that everybody, the U.S., the EU,
we're
the
paying
other
for
Arab
that.
states,
Yes,
we are paying
we're right.
for
So
that.
just so you know, Trump lifted that.
Well,
And the
yeah.
second that
So wait, when you say Trump lifted that, are you talking about the Taylor Force Act?
when I thought I could have sworn he banned that the Palestinian he banned the money from
Okay,
going
so
to do that.
let me just let you and everybody else know that there was a thing in 2018 called the Taylor Force Act. Taylor Force Act restricted aid to the Palestinian Authority as long as they continued those stipends. So that was supposed to happen, but they continued doing it, and money still kept flowing to the Palestinian Authority. How do you explain that? Well, in 2024, lawmakers in the United States, I believe Ted Cruz was leading that charge, but don't quote me on that, said now we need new sanctions because the PLO, which is what the Palestinian Authority is, were now continuing to pay. So they made a new law. And the law was the PLO and PA Terror Payments Accountability Act. That's what it was. And so now that was supposed to stop. But they didn't stop. They said, Mahmoud Abbas, who is the head of the Palestinian Authority, said, I'm going to sign this thing that says I abolish all these pay for slave programs. But guess what? They didn't abolish the pay for slave programs. They merely put a new name on it. They transferred authority to a new body, also under Abbas's office, as if we're all effing stupid. And they basically said, we're going to continue to pay, but we're basically rebranding the same system. For I think at last count, it was like 15% of imprisoned prisoners, their families were told we're stopping the payment. Everyone else still got it, and everyone who's died since has gotten it as well. So no, he didn't stop it. He wants to stop it. And we keep trusting the PA for some reason to do it. I know Trump doesn't trust them.
Neither
And
does Marco
obviously,
Rubio.
I was about to say, and obviously Marco Rubio
And
doesn't.
obviously Marco Rubio.
Yeah, because he didn't even let them into the country.
I know,
go meet
which
with
makes
the
you
UN,
ask
which is
so
lovely.
much. But before we run out of time, I think this is really important to get to. So Trump basically said to Hamas, and not a very favorable deal, really, for Bibi to have to, for Benjamin Netanyahu to have to want to sign releasing the 48 hostages. Obviously, not even 20 of them being alive anymore. And for thousands upon thousands upon thousands of terrorists, Palestinian prisoners, terrorists, just a bunch of terrorists. So they came out today and they said, oh, we'll come back to the negotiating table. Sources in Hamas tell, I don't even know who the sources could be at this point, tell the Saudi newspaper, I'm not going to pronounce its name right, that Hamas informed them, the mediators, it would not be possible to release all the hostages, both living and dead, on the first day of the ceasefire, as demanded by the new American proposal for a ceasefire deal. The sources explain to the newspaper that there are hostages who were killed in places where the IDF would need to cease fire, apparently, for parentheses, for an extended period, in order to recover them from under the rubble, or who were buried in areas the IDF later entered. This is just, listen, I'm just going to say this, and as we're running out of time, I'm one of those people, and I'm going to tell you something a lot of us, to the listeners, a lot of us ask these questions amongst ourselves. And I'm not referring to liberal Jews. I'm talking about us Zionists. People often ask us about this situation, or we talk amongst ourselves about this situation. And it's a horrific thing that we have to talk about. No, I don't have any family members that are hostages there. Yes, I do have family members that are serving in the IDF. Yes, I do have a family member that was in a tank that was blown up. Thank God he was okay, as they were just entering Gaza after October 7th. So yes, I do have a big stake in a lot of this, considering I have a lot of family there. You cannot, and the discussion is about the 18 hostages or the 20 that are still alive. And I get it, these hostage families, I can't imagine what these families are going through, what their parents are going through. But I could say no American would ever trade 18 hostages for thousands of prisoners that we know are going to go on commit murder, and not only go on and commit murder.
Absolutely. What you're talking about, by the way, is for every hostage that will come back alive, 150 other hostages, you morons online, and not even prisoners, convicted criminals that were the murderers of children, that were bombers of buses, that attacked people with knives, that masterminded the death and rape of Jews in the streets. Those are the people that are being let out. And so now consider, if I'm going to, and by the way, I'm with you. I cannot imagine what those families are going through, and I don't want to condemn anybody to anything other than freedom. But if I'm going to let somebody out knowing that 10 more people are going to die, and the calculus is, I know this guy that is now captured, and the next people, I don't know them because who knows who they're going to be, so I can kind of like Schrodinger's cat, the situation of, hey, who knows who those people are? I know it'll be 10 to 20 people, or since it's for every one hostage, it's 150 murderers and attackers. It could be 150 people. And the calculus is terrible, and it becomes this disgusting kind of math, this math of madness you have to do. A, we incentivize kidnapping Jews. You kidnap a Jew, you win the lottery. We're giving them a path to how to do it in the future. They will continue. All they need to do is grab 150 people out. We already talked about it, right? 150 on the low end, by the way. I won't even talk about previous exchanges.
And no, but I think it's most important. It's so important to remember that for people to understand that the head of Hamas was part of the prisoner release. So Yahya Sinwar and Nasrallah were both detained and let go. Just correct me if I'm wrong. Which one it was that
it was Sinwar who had the brain tumor, and it's an insane story. But he was someone who, by the way, his nickname was not because he killed Jews, it was because he killed people in Gaza. So he was a murderer on both sides of the equation and was let go as part of a hostage exchange deal.
And what
he's
drives
the
me
mastermind
crazy,
of 10/7.
And what's crazy is that the person that's doing you never learn. The person that's part of the negotiations, they released them for a soldier named, please say his name correctly, Gilad Shalit, and this is the same person that orchestrated that is involved in the negotiations now. You never learn, Golan. And so when people ask me that question, I don't think 18 lives are worth 5 million. As cold and as callous as that might sound.
It's terrible to say, but if you are saying 20 lives are priceless, that's what Jews believe. Every life of it is a world entire, right? So that's a line you may have heard before. It is a holy line for us, and 20 lives are obviously priceless. But 3,000 murderers being set free ensures an avalanche of new lives will be taken. And that's not peace. That's not a path to peace. That's not a path to anything except a death sentence that is even greater than what would happen if we did not release these people.
And I'll just end with this and say, every American, you are full of shit if you are condemning Israel, because you know exactly what we have done and what you would do. When we've been attacked, you never gave a crap about no matter what, people always love to. You ever notice people go on when they talk about the horrific mistakes we made with the Iraq and Afghanistan wars? They never talk about the atrocity. They never talk about the lives lost. They talk about the money.
Right.
That's like the biggest thing they ever talk about. They never go, oh my God, the poor Muslims that were killed, or the babies that we killed. It's the trillions of dollars that we spent. And I'm not saying that's not a fair argument, but don't give me this crap now that you actually give a crap about Muslim life. The only time people seem to give a crap about Muslim life is when Jews or Israelis are trying to defend themselves and make sure that it doesn't come here.
That's the only time that they want to let us know that that somehow we're the villains in this story. Anyone who actually knows anything about what's going on, and most of them don't, in their idiotic defense, most of them don't. There was I got to bring this up before we get off. There was a letter just signed today by, 1,200 people, something like that. And this is in the film industry. You're talking about the usual suspects. You're talking about Adam McKay and the Ava DuVernay and Boots Riley and Cynthia Nixon and all these same people, Ilana Glazer, Javier Bardem, all the people who already hated the Jews before. Even some of them, Mark Ruffalo's, et cetera, all the people who have already been outspoken, Susan Sarandon's and all of that. So they signed a letter that said, not we're going to boycott the Israeli government, not that we're going to boycott Bibi Netanyahu, not that we're going to boycott the war. They've decided, this is all film industry people, they've decided they are going to boycott all artistic communities and artistic organizations in Israel. So all film communities, film festivals, film production companies, film nonprofits, they are going to refuse to have their film shown in Israel. They are doing basically a new blacklist. And the blacklist is something that, at least for many in Hollywood, it's one of those things that they hang their head in shame at the blacklist that occurred back then, and they lambast everything that had to do with it. And now the same people, and you're talking about leftists especially, that talk about that as if it was Holocaust Part 2, are now the ones perpetrating it. And they cannot see the irony in it. All these Tilda Swinton garbage dumps of people. They're doing it now. Yeah.
You know what it is, going? And I'm being serious when I say this. They're idiots. They're complete morons. The problem is that they have massive platforms.
Correct.
But they're idiots.
I call them meat
You're
puppets.
talking. Yeah, but however you want to say it, if you can't critically think, don't speak. And if you can't look at what's going on around you and see what's happening, don't speak because you're an absolute idiot. And I have no problems with saying that. Things I don't know about. If you bring up to me certain things, I'm going to say it's not my wheelhouse. I have no idea. I've been asked to write articles about certain things. I told you that story about the economy, and I'm like, it's just not my wheelhouse. I could speculate, but I'm
Right.
not
I
an
say this all
economist.
the time. Better to keep your mouth shut and be thought a fool than open it and remove all doubt.
Right. If you want to listen to a show that talks about the economy a lot, that we'll talk about that on the world according to Ben Stein. Because Ben Stein is an economist. Father was an economist. And father ran the economy for the country. We could talk to him. But if you don't know, and everything is based, Douglas Murray talks about this, about feelings and emotions. And you got to get past feelings. If we continue to rule over feelings and emotions, we are dead people. We are dead if feelings and emotions are what guide us. Okay. And that's just my humble opinion. And with that being said, I don't give a crap what happens. People often ask that question. They always want the gotcha with when they ask people if they care about the lives over there of the people. I don't. I'll be honest. I don't.
You
For
mean the
every,
people? You mean the people in Gaza?
the people in Gaza, the people in Palestine, I don't care. I don't care because for everyone, I'm not going to give it any numbers, so I don't sound like a hypocrite or people really want to know what I'm thinking. I don't give a crap. Okay,
Well,
I said it.
I don't. I'm not far off from that. I had someone whose kids have babysat my kids. I was at my house this weekend, and suddenly my daughter runs into me and says, "Abba, a Palestinian flag." And I said, "No, no, no, no. We're in the country. There's nobody cares about this stuff out here." And sure enough, I went out to where our swing set was, and from the swing where she'd been swinging, you could see that the people whose house it was, whose kids had babysat my children, had hoisted a Palestinian flag onto their roof. Now, I am not a shrinking violet. I immediately went over, "Hey, I think maybe there's been a mistake." Put the thing up, and she said, "Oh, I'm just so devastated by blah, 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 blah." Now, 48 hours later, the flag had been removed, and I had educated them a little bit, and now they're asking me for a reading list about the actual situation. So luckily, I'm the guy who happened to live across the street. But my first thought was, this is like watching the Holocaust happen. And then we bomb Germany because we're trying to stop the Nazis. And then you feeling so bad about the people who weren't actually exactly Nazis, but maybe supported the Nazi party. So you hoist a big swastika over your house. So when I think about it that way, I don't give a crap about them either.
Thank you for sharing that. I know it's one of those things that it could get us into trouble. Who knows? I don't. I'm not calling for anything to happen to them, but what I'm saying is, if Hamas would allow them into the tunnel system, there would be no death in Gaza. There would be no death in Judea and Samaria if they let them into that tunnel system instead of using them as shields. That's 100% a fact. On that note, I want to thank everybody that's been listening to us. The rankings, it's really funny. We never ranked in Israel, and all of a sudden we popped up in Israel, the one place you'd think. Well, we're
Top
thank God
10
we
in
did.
Israel in news
Top 10 in
commentary.
Israel, news and commentary, and popping up. It's
Finally,
interesting.
all of my accoutrements are paying off.
I know. I sent that picture to you so you could send it to everybody that you know, and I know you did.
Oh, yeah.
And, it's interesting. Shows like Fauda, which is an incredible Israeli show, it doesn't always rank top 10 when it comes out in the United States, but it's one of the biggest shows in the Arab world. In places like Indonesia, where we have, in different places where we're ranked, because there are so many people there that actually want to hear these, and they see they want the future. Those the places where we're referring to are not the future; they're the past, and everybody knows that. So so we're very grateful.
Very well put. Very well put. And we do have fans in Indonesia. We have fans in several places where they have Muslim majorities and Muslim minorities. And I think that one of the reasons why people are listening to us in those territories is because they want to know the alternative view, because they have been so indoctrinated with only one perspective. But I think the other reason is what you're saying. They're looking to the future when they no longer have to be under the thumb of Sharia law.
Well said. And on that note, I want to thank everybody again from the bottom of our hearts, everybody that helps us out, especially people on truth. That I love it because it's like you build a little community, and I sort of like that. I like that style of life. I like content sharing, and I believe in content. And I want to thank everybody just for passing and spreading the word. And always remember, follow us, give us that 5-star review. Go to thedailycheatsheet.com and you can find all of our links over there. This is dailycheatsheet.com. We will be back tomorrow. And again, I want to wish everybody a good morning, afternoon, and night world, wherever you are. God bless you all.